Hello, and welcome to Unit 1, Foundations of Psychology. Psychology has evolved dramatically since it was first researched. Today we define psychology as a scientific study of behavior and mental processes. In this video, we will break down this definition and see how the foundations of psychology have shaped the way we study it today. As a science, psychology is studied through the use of the scientific method. The scientific method starts with a hypothesis, a specific question that can be tested, and an operational definition which describe the way in which the experiment will be carried out to remove bias and create a convincing conclusion. An experiment can either be single-blind or double-blind. In a single-blind experiment, the subjects are uninformed of the purpose of the experiment. In a double-blind, both the subjects and the researchers are uninformed. Research can be carried out in many different ways, from naturalistic observation to surveys to different kinds of case studies. Naturalistic observation involves studying subjects in their natural environment without the influence of anything that could alter their behavior. Surveys are used in larger groups as a way to measure the attitudes and behavior patterns, but are often found to be unreliable and biased. Case studies are extensive studies of all or one part of a person's life. Examples include longitudinal and cross-sectional studies, which will be discussed more in the developmental unit.
To interpret collected data from the experiment, statistical analysis allows for data to be manipulated in ways it can be better understood. To help explain the data, researchers attempt to eliminate confounding variables, which are extra variables that could be affecting the outcome without the experimenter's knowledge. When analyzing the data, descriptive statistics can be used. A bell curve can be used to show distribution of a particular set of data by showing all the possible values and how often they occur. Measures of central tendency help to identify the center of these distributions. The mean depicts the average value between all the data, the mode shows the value that occurs the most often, and the median gives the value at the 50th percentile. Other than measures of central tendency, an outlier or an extreme score can suggest errors in the experimental method and indicate that the experimental process was possibly flawed. The range of a set of data tells how scores vary from each other. Similarly, the standard deviation looks at how scores vary from the mean. A t-score or z-score can be found to compare sets of data by giving a value of the amount of standard deviations below or above the average. Correlations are used to look at the relationships between two variables. A positive correlation says that events move in the same direction, and a negative correlation says the events move in opposite directions. A correlation coefficient is a numerical value that shows how two given things relate to each other by showing the strength of a correlation. On a scale of -1 to 1, a coefficient of 0.3 to 0.7 suggests a moderate correlation, 0 to 0.3 a weak correlation, and 0.7 to 1 a strong correlation. The weaker the correlation, the more spread the data looks when plotted on a scatter plot. The study of modern psychology began with Wilhelm Wundt in Germany in 1832. He created the first lab for psychological research and used introspection to delve deeper into the human mind. Introspection is the examination of one's own mental and emotional processes. He created the idea of structuralism, or the idea that the human mind can be understood through simple, definable components and how they interact with one another. From Wundt's ideas in Germany, William James took them across the ocean to the U.S., where he created the first lab in the nation. He created functionalism, an idea that focuses more on the capability of the mind instead of the process of thought. Under the leadership of both Wundt and James, G. Stanley Hall became the first to organize psychology in the U.S., creating the American Psychological Association in 1892.
From these foundations, the 6 main perspectives of psychology were created as new scientists entered the field. The neuroscience perspective used psychology as the study of mental processes and brain chemistry. Every behavior or thought is considered to be a physical event in the brain.
The psychodynamic perspective was established by Sigmund Freud, stating that behavior and thought are influenced by our unconscious. Our unconscious, a concept coined by Freud, is said to be created by past experiences that are not readily available in our conscious awareness. It is part of our subconscious, which also consists of the preconscious, information that can be easily pulled into our conscious awareness. Freud established psychoanalysis, which will be further discussed when we reach treatments. Briefly, it involved the study of ego-defense mechanisms, the stages of psychosexual development, and dream analysis. To study his patients, Freud relied mainly on free association, in which he allows patients to speak their mind and develop ideas of the root of their problems by paying attention to topics they avoid or speak about often. The behavioral perspective was created by scientists who thought that the psychodynamic perspective was too unscientific. It focuses on behavior only, stating that only observable actions were worth studying. It began with Ivan Pavlov, who accidentally discovered the idea of classical conditioning by using meat powder to cause dogs to salivate. The term for behaviorism was eventually coined by John Watson, who used a baby named Little Albert to study the effects of classical conditioning on a baby's fear of loud noises, which eventually led to his associated fear of anything fuzzy. Operant conditioning was originally studied by Edward Thorndike, who studied cats and their behaviors with and without a reward. He considered behaviors that were followed with some sort of satisfaction were stamped in, and those that were not were stamped out. B. F. Skinner followed Thorndike's idea with rats in his Skinner box, also known as an operant chamber. He believed that behavior was influenced by a consequence that was created by the subject operating on its environment. The idea of reinforcement versus punishment was also established through this. Positive reinforcement involves causing a behavior to happen more often by rewarding the subject with something desirable, while negative reinforcement removes something undesirable. Positive punishment causes a behavior to happen less often by introducing something undesirable, and negative punishment removes something desirable. The humanistic perspective focuses on a person living up to their full potential. Abraham Maslow was the first to introduce this idea with his hierarchy of needs. He believed that lower-level needs such as physiological needs and safety needed to be fulfilled before a person could focus on higher-level needs such as love and belonging. Eventually, a person with all their needs fulfilled would reach a sense of self-actualization. Later, other humanists added self-transcendence to account for individuals who went out of their ways to help others, often threatening their own lower-level needs. Carl Rogers contributed to this perspective with his idea of self-concept, in which people evaluate themselves in different ways.
The cognitive perspective involves the way in which we think. It focuses almost exclusively on our thoughts, and the mental process is part of our definition of psychology. The origins of this perspective lay with Aristotle and Wundt. Finally, the eclectic perspective is the most widely used perspective today. It utilizes ideas from the first five to create a perspective that accounts for all of psychology. Today, ethics has become a huge part of psychology and has changed the way research is done to expand psychology. The 7 main principles of ethical research are confidentiality, rights, care of animals, informed consent, risk-gain analysis, use of deception, and debriefing. Confidentiality keeps the information of the subjects or patients private, and the rights of research participants must be explicitly stated. In doing research, animals must not be harmed or made uncomfortable. Subjects must be given enough information to allow them to decide if they want to participate. They should be able to see both the risks and gains associated with research. The practical values of the research must also be evaluated. Deception is important to some experiments but should be minimal. Debriefing is the process of informing subjects on the experiments following the procedure. The study of psychology has changed dramatically since Wundt. We hope this will help you in studying the other units as well. Thanks for watching.